Welcome, I'm Bruce Munro, and with me is International Relations Specialist Professor Robert Patman, and this is Global Insight. Less than 2 months after United States and NATO troops withdrew from Afghanistan, a humanitarian crisis is looming. Welcome, Robert.
Good morning, Bruce.
What has happened in Afghanistan since the Taliban took over control again back in August?
Well, the Taliban have struggled to assert control, having seized power, and the country is facing a major humanitarian crisis as well as a deteriorating security situation, and those two factors together are creating something of a perfect storm. And at the moment, Afghanistan seems to be teetering on the brink of major problems. In humanitarian terms, many of the medical institutions in that country, medical facilities, are short of funds. The World Bank indicated they had frozen money that was earmarked, something like 600 million was earmarked for healthcare in Afghanistan. That money's been frozen, and so that is having a big impact. So the number of functioning medical facilities in Afghanistan has dipped alarmingly. There is a situation in a country of more than 36 million people where something like half the population could be facing serious food shortages in the near future.
Officials say that ISIS and al-Qaeda are regrouping in Afghanistan and could threaten Western targets. Does this mean that the 20 years that Western troops, including New Zealand soldiers, spent in Afghanistan has been a failure?
I think the answer to that is nuanced. It's a yes and no. The 20-year presence did bring great gains for many ordinary Afghans in terms of new media freedoms, the ability to assemble and express ideas, democracy, albeit corrupt democracy and fraudulent elections. But nevertheless, it was major gains on the period of harsh repression that preceded the 20-year international presence. But, and here is a big but, those gains couldn't be sustained because the Taliban were able to defeat the Afghan government and their American backers and seize control. So those gains are now in doubt. And that is the situation that confronts us at the moment, a mixed picture.
So what should happen immediately and what should happen in the longer term?
I think immediately there has to be, a rethink by the international community of engaging with the Taliban government. The Taliban government is facing an insurgency at the moment. The ISIS-K group are basically at war with the Taliban. This group was responsible, our viewers may recall, for that appalling suicide bombing in Kabul International Airport just in the latter stages of the international evacuation from the airport at the end of September. They've gone on to commit other atrocities since then within Afghanistan, including the beheading of a Taliban official. So in effect, Afghanistan's teetering on the brink of civil war. Given that situation and given the potentially horrific humanitarian situation where many ordinary Afghans are suffering, I think the international community needs to have an initiative and try and have a dialogue with the Taliban. And of course, it should not be unconditional dialogue. There's several things that need to be resolved. The Taliban have been ambiguous in their commitments towards women's rights. They've said they're going to safeguard them. They used all the inclusive language in the build-up to taking power in Kabul, but that language hasn't really followed through into concrete actions. So that's a bit of a pressure point. I think, quite frankly, the sanctions that have been applied to Afghanistan and have contributed to this, very difficult humanitarian situation. For the viewers, we should point out that something like $9 billion of funds which were in the Afghan central bank's American account were frozen. And they were frozen because the American government had reservations about the Taliban's approach to women. They believed that they would resort back to the repressive policies of when the Taliban was in power between 1996 and 2001. They also have grave reservations or grave concerns about the presence of al-Qaeda in the country. We've been speaking about ISIS-K. The Taliban had given commitments to the Americans, to the Trump administration, that they would not allow al-Qaeda to become active in their country. Once again, there seems to be something of a slippage between declaratory policy and substantive policy. Al-Qaeda are certainly present in Afghanistan. They don't seem to be active at the moment, but the big fear for the Americans is that they want the Taliban to basically, I think, expel the al-Qaeda from their country. They want, militant foreign groups like ISIS-K and al-Qaeda out of Afghanistan. And the big tension between the Taliban and some of these groups, particularly ISIS-K, is the Taliban have pledged to establish Islamic rule in Afghanistan and said they have no interest in extending that system elsewhere, whereas groups like ISIS-K see the Taliban as nationalistic, and they have visions of building a caliphate embracing Afghanistan, Pakistan and parts of India. Somehow given the complexity of the situation in Afghanistan, the international community does have to step up and establish a dialogue with the Taliban, not because to legitimize the Taliban necessarily, but to help ordinary Afghans who are really the victim of this appalling situation.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. Catch us next time on Global Insight. Ka kite anō.